Zo. Het is een tijdje geleden. Eens even kijken. Wat comments. Bekering, ik hou van tongen. Veel informatie met tongen. Ik hou van tongen. Nasty. Hey. Je houdt van tongen blijkbaar. Eet smakelijk. Ik hou niet van tongen. Maar ik hou wel van een mooie getuigenis. Kijk dit filmpje eens.
Like almost every night. I was very precocious. In high school, I did a lot. I saw a lot. I experimented a lot. In college, I again had this double life because I had him as my close friend, but I also had this other group of guys who were my friends who were not homosexual. So after college, he and I moved to Tokyo. That was the biggest turning point of all because that's when homosexual behavior became my identity. So after the relationship ends, I decide to move to LA. I moved here to pursue writing and acting. Mm-hmm. I was having a great time and going to the Oscars and having dinner with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks after the Oscars and going to Prince's house where he performed a concert in his backyard for 3 hours and going to Ariana Huffington's house for cocktails of the Huffington Post. And so I was part of this whole kind of like crowd and I was kind of like living this really fun. My social life was really fun. We never once spoke about God. Mm-hmm. It was just assumed God didn't exist. It was like, that's only for dumb people. Like we sophisticated people, we would never entertain that idea. So we never once talked about God. Not once. No one ever said, oh, do you believe in God or do you believe there's life? No, not once. Over the years in LA, I slowly but surely became an atheist because I really did at a certain point believe that the Bible was just an ancient myth like any other myth. Mm-hmm. And that God didn't exist. By the time, of 2009, when I had this major conversion, I really was a practical atheist. It all came to a head in Paris of March of 2009. I was at Paris Fashion Week. Mm-hmm. And I went to a bunch of the runway shows and they have after parties. And I was at an after party. And that's when I felt like totally empty. And everyone was there from the fashion world. Kanye was there, all these people. And I was drinking champagne. And I just was like, this can't be my life anymore. Like, what am I going to do? Because I can't be a Christian. Like, am I going to be put out to pasture in Palm Springs? Like, what's going to happen to me? I kind of had this experience in Paris. And then I came back to LA, got busy with work, kind of forgot about that. And then 6 months later, I meet these Christians at a coffee shop. It was kind of our hangout spot for the day or on the weekends. And because it was very busy with people, interesting, fun people would come in. We knew a lot of people that were there. So we just hang out like for the whole afternoon. And that particular day, we're chatting and my friend and I, we just like suddenly look over and we notice a table next to us and it's a group of young people with Bibles on the table, like physical Bibles, which I had never seen in LA in my life. And so I'd never seen a Bible in public. And so that it was a real shock to both of us. He was gay as well. So we were just kind of like, we looked at each other like, what are they doing? This is so crazy. Like at Intelligentsia. And so he encouraged me to talk to them because he liked to kind of engage in controversial conversation. And so finally, I just turned to them and I was like, are you guys Christians? Like, what's the deal? And, it's a Christian's fantasy come true when a gay atheist asks you, like, what's the gospel? And so they said, yeah, we're Christians and we go to an evangelical church in Hollywood and blah, blah, blah. And they explained their faith to me. They explained the gospel to me. And I, of course, get to the $64,000 question. I said, well, what does your church in Hollywood believe about homosexuality? And they said, we believe it's a sin. And I loved how honest they were. I loved how just blunt. They didn't try to like bait and switch me or, dodge the question. They just were like, it's a sin. And so they said, well, why don't you come to our church next Sunday? And I said, well, I don't know. Just give me the address and I'll think about it this whole week. And so I did. I actually went the whole week. I thought about it and I went back and forth on it. I was like, if I go, it could be embarrassing. And, if people my friends find out that I'm going, they're going to think I'm insane and think I'm betraying them, like going to the enemy.
The
enemy's camp. And so but the following Sunday, I woke up and I was like, I guess I'm doing this. I had never been to an evangelical church. And so I didn't know what to expect. And it was just a plain auditorium, which I appreciated. And I walked in and it was like the Christian worship music was playing. I cringed at that because I was like, oh my gosh, Christian music. And then I was like, wait, it's not bad.
Yeah.
And I liked it. And I took a seat. I found a seat by myself near the front, and the pastor came out and started preaching on Romans chapter 7.
Oh, yeah.
And
good. So good.
That pastor actually was at the coffee shop as well. He just kind of like walked by the table next to us and said hi to them and left. So I had seen him already. So when he came out to start preaching, I was like, that's the guy from the coffee shop. Like in my head, I was just like, wow, this is the same guy. He was preaching, and why I always say this, while he was preaching, everything he was saying was resonating as truth in my mind, in my heart, and I didn't understand why. I was like, why? What is happening? I was riveted to the sermon. I was hanging on every word of his, and I was just so blown away. I was like, what is he saying? He was preaching for an hour. His sermons are an hour long, and I didn't want him to stop talking. I'm like, just keep talking. And then after the sermon, he said there's people on the side of the auditorium who are on the prayer ministry if you want prayer for anything, blah, blah, blah. And then there's another half hour of worship music. And so I had this moment of like, do I go over and ask for prayer? If I do, like the people who invited me here might be watching me and it's embarrassing. But I thought I was just like, I'm going to do this. I'm here. I'm already in the door. I'm just going to go. So I went over and asked this guy for prayer. I said, hey, I don't know what I believe, but I'm here. And he said, let me pray for you. And he prayed for me. It seemed very powerful. And I went back to my seat, sat down. Everyone else was standing up and singing for the next 25 minutes, worshiping. As soon as I sat down, the Holy Spirit just like completely flooded my body and my mind and my soul. And in that moment, God revealed himself to me. It was a road to Damascus kind of moment. God was like, I'm God. Jesus is my son. Heaven is real. Hell is real. The Bible is true. Welcome to my kingdom. And I started like water was just like flying out of my eyes. Like I was bawling hysterically because I had just met Jesus, the King of the universe. And I was crying over the conviction of sin, but also over the joy of knowing that God exists. And meeting Jesus and finally knowing the meaning of life. Like that's a huge deal. And obviously, because when you don't know the meaning of life, it's a heavy burden to bear because you're like, what am I doing here? Mm-hmm. And so I finally knew where I came from, what I'm doing here and where I was going. And I was just crying and crying and crying and crying and crying and doubled over. And the service ends. And I get in my car, come home, and the same thing, it happens again. I get into bed, and God's like, let me show you some more of my glory. And I just immediately burst into tears again. And I was like, ah. And I jumped out of my bed, and in the middle of my bedroom, I said, God, you have my whole life. I'm done. I'm yours. That's it. And I knew... I was all in, and I knew in that moment that homosexual behavior was a sin. I knew that it was no longer a part of my life. I knew it was not my identity. Mm-hmm. I knew that dating guys was no longer a part of my future. I always say this, but I was like, I had just met Jesus. So I'm like, I'm going with that guy. A good riddance to those old guys. Like I'm going with Jesus. Yeah. And I don't care what I don't care what it involves. Like, I am all in. I don't care if I never touch another human being in my life. I'm all in for this.
Wow.
Like, this is amazing. And that was 13 years ago.
Wauw. Vond je dat ook wauw? Prijs God hoe die mensen om kan draaien. 180 graden heeft het met mij gedaan en met zoveel anderen. Wauw. Nou, hey. Misschien ga je later nog een tong eten of zo. Maar ik hoop dat je dit filmpje ook hebt gezien. God zegen.